At the end of the topic, you will be able to understand the process involved in weathering, describe the different types of physical weathering, understand the difference between the thermal stress and frost weathering. Sometimes we notice that a huge piece of rock which remains in the place for a long time changes its shape and after some time it disappears. An area which was once a low-lying region has got filled with sand and stones. How does all this happen? The climatic changes of that place like temperature, winds, rainfall and frost along with natural agents of gradation like rivers, winds, glaciers and sea waves are responsible for such changes in the landforms. Changes not only happen in human life but also on the surface of the landform. Weathering is the process of disintegration of rock near the Earth's surface. Weathering is a complex interaction of physical, chemical and biological processes that changes the shape and texture of the rock of the crust. Plants and animals' life, atmosphere and running water are the major causes of weathering. There are three types of weathering: mechanical weathering or physical weathering, chemical weathering and biological weathering. Physical weathering or mechanical weathering. Physical or mechanical weathering is the process of disintegration of rocks into smaller and smaller fragments without losing its chemical property. The following processes are involved in physical weathering: thermal stress, frost weathering, salt crystal growth. Thermal stress occurs due to the change in temperature. Rocks are made up of a combination of minerals. The change in temperature on the rocks causes stress on it. The rock shrinks and expands due to variation in the temperature. The prolonged expansion and contraction leads to breaking of rocks. This process is called thermal stress. This type of weathering is common in desert regions. Frost action is a type of weathering that happens mostly in mountainous regions. In mountainous regions, water seeps into the cracks in the rocks. When the temperature falls below freezing point, the water in the crack freezes. As the frozen water occupies more space and it exerts pressure on the rocks, thus the cracks widen and finally the rock breaks into smaller fragments. This type of weathering is called frost weathering. When saline water seeps into the cracks and joints of the rock and evaporates, it leaves behind the salt in the cracks. Slowly it becomes a salt crystal and causes the rocks to disintegrate. This is known as salt crystallization or haloclasty. In this topic, you have learnt the climatic changes of that place like temperature, rainfall and frost, along with natural agents of gradation like rivers, winds, glaciers and sea waves are responsible for such change in the landforms. Changes not only happen in human life but also on the surface of the landform. Weathering is the process of disintegration of rock near the Earth's surface. Weathering is a complex interaction of physical, chemical and biological processes that changes the shape and texture of the rock of the crust. There are three types of weathering: mechanical weathering or physical weathering, chemical weathering and biological weathering. At the end of the topic, you will be able to understand the process of chemical and biological weathering, list the different types of chemical weathering, distinguish between hydration and hydrolysis. Weathering is the breaking down of big rocks to smaller particles. There are three types of weathering: physical weathering, chemical weathering, and biological weathering. Let us learn about the chemical and biological weathering. Chemical weathering is breakdown of rocks by the chemical agents. It usually happens when a chemical reaction changes the composition of the rock that causes the breaking up of rocks into smaller sizes. Mostly the main agent of chemical weathering is water. Chemical weathering includes the processes of oxidation and hydrolysis. The rainwater becomes acidic when the atmospheric carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide or nitrogen oxide dissolves in it. If such acidic rainwater falls on a limestone or chalk region, the minerals are dissolved and results in the weathering of the rocks. This type of weathering is known as dissolution. Mineral hydration is an inorganic reaction where water gets attached to mineral of the rock and forms a new mineral. This new mineral occupies more space which exerts mechanical pressure. This leads to the breaking down of the rocks. Hydrolysis is a process of breaking down of rock by acidic water to produce clay and soluble salts. In this type of reactions, silicate is converted into clay minerals by hydrogen and hydroxide ions. In general, oxidation is the process of rusting. The processes where the metals present in the rock combine with oxygen and water to form oxides. These oxides change the color of rock and make the rock weak. It consequently breaks the rock into smaller rock particles. This is a form of weathering in which growth of roots and burrowing animals play a major role in breaking the rocks. Plant roots are the most efficient agents of the biological weathering. Human beings, plants, and animals are primarily responsible for biological weathering. In this topic, you have learnt weathering is the breaking down of big rocks to smaller particles. Chemical weathering is breaking down of rocks by the chemical agents. Mineral hydration is an inorganic reaction where water gets attached to mineral of the rock and forms a new mineral. Hydrolysis is a process of breaking down of rock by acidic water to produce clay and soluble salts. Oxidation is the process of rusting. The processes where the metals present in the rock combine with oxygen and water to form oxides. In biological weathering, growth of roots and burrowing animals play a major role in breaking the rocks. At the end of the topic, you will be able to understand the different courses of a river, identify the different landforms associated with running water. Gradation is the process that changes the surface features of the earth. Gradation includes erosion, transportation, and deposition of the eroded materials. The agents of gradation are running water, waves, glaciers, and wind. Let's learn about the running water as an agent of gradation. A river is a natural water course usually originates from the mountain and flows through the plain and drains into the ocean, sea, or a lake. It does the process of erosion, transportation, and deposition on its way. The river is divided into three different courses from the point of origin till the end point, where it meets the ocean, sea, or a lake. They are upper course or mountain course, middle course, lower course. The mountain course or the upper course of the river begins from the mountain ridge. Steep slope and high velocity of the river leads to vertical erosion. It does only corrosion action. The features which are formed in the upper course are gorges, canyons, and V-shaped valleys. River capture is also known as river piracy. This happens when the river drainage system is diverted from its own basin and flows instead down the basin of another river. This occurs due to tectonic movement, landslide, and erosion. Rapids. Due to alternate or unequal arrangements of hard rock and soft rocks, the river water runs swiftly, jumping across the mountains and falls downstream, leading to the formation of rapids. Cataracts. A series of rapids are referred to as cataracts. Waterfalls. When there is a vertical drop in the course of the river, it plunges down from a height. This is called waterfall. Valley course or middle course. In the valley course, the vertical corrosion is replaced by the lateral corrosion. In the middle course, the river has more energy and volume than in the upper course. The river channel becomes deeper and sideward erosion is more in this course. Active erosion of the banks widens the V-shaped valley. Meanders. A meander is generally a bend or a winding curve in a river. A meander forms when the river water erodes the bank of river and widens the curve at one place and deposits the slit at another curve, as a river cannot flow in straight line due to high velocity and gravity. The irregularities of the ground force the river to swing into loops, forming meanders. River cliffs. A river cliff is a steep slope formed at the outer bank of the meander by the process of erosion. The river water collides with the outer river bank and erodes the soil from there to form a small cliff. Interlocking spurs. Interlocking spurs are overlapping edge of high ground. As the river finds its way between the hard rock, it tends to bend and flow in between the land projections called interlocking spurs. They mostly resemble the teeth of the zip. The plain course. In the plain course, the river becomes very slow and does only the process of deposition. Deposition of sediments leads to the formation of complicated channels. The volume of the water increases as many small streams join the main river. Coarse materials are dropped and fine slits are carried to the mouth of the river. Some of the major features formed at the plain course are footplains, oxbow lake, and delta. Floodplain. River at the lower course carries large quantity of sediments. Floodplain is a large area adjacent to the river which is flooded during the period of heavy rainfall. A layer of sediment is deposited during each flood, gradually building up a fertile floodplain. When river starts flowing in the normal course, their deposits are dropped on the sides which accumulates to form raised banks called the levees. Oxbow Lake. In the lower course of the river, the meander becomes more active. In the meander on the inside loop, the river deposits, meanwhile in the outside, the water flows faster and does erosional works. Over a period of time, the loop of the meander widens and the neck of it disappears. The meander is detached from the loop and a horseshoe-like Oxbow Lake is formed. Thus, Oxbow Lake is a crescent-shaped lake lying alongside a river. Delta. River delta is a landform that is formed at the mouth of the river. The slit that river has not dropped yet are deposited at the mouth of the river, where the river meets the sea, lake or ocean. As the deposition of fine slit is more here, the river becomes shallow and gets divided into a number of distributaries, forming an alluvial fan-like feature called delta. In this topic you have learnt, gradation is the process that changes the surface features of the earth. The agents of gradation are running water, waves, glaciers and wind. The river is divided into 3 different courses from the point of origin till the end point, where it meets the ocean, sea or a lake. They are upper course or mountain course, middle course, lower course. The mountain course or the upper course of a river begins from the mountain range. In the valley course, the vertical corrosion is replaced by the lateral corrosion. In the plain course, the river becomes very slow and does only the process of deposition. At the end of the topic, you will be able to understand the different erosional features formed by the wave action, discuss the various depositional features formed by the action of waves. Waves are the most important and powerful agents of gradation near the coastal region. Waves are caused due to the friction in the wind. The stronger the wind, the stronger the waves. Waves erode, transport and deposit at the coastal areas. The softer rocks are eroded easily than the harder rocks and different features. Base. In the coastline, continuous wave action hits the rocks of the various resistances and causes erosion. The prolonged erosion creates a large inlet of water to the land. This is called a bay. For example, Bay of Bengal, Hudson Bay. Cliffs. A cliff is vertical rock exposed to erosional activities near coastal regions. Cliff is common on coast in the mountainous areas. Cliffs are usually formed by rock that is resistant to erosion and weathering. Cave, arch, stack and stump. Cave, arch, stack and stump are the features that are formed at coastal areas which are close to mountainous regions. Prolonged wave attack vertical lines or weak areas on the rock strata known as faults. The process, like hydraulic action and abrasion, widen the faults into cracks, and eventually the water enters into the cracks and leads to the formation of caves. Over a period of time, the cave is eroded into an arch where the sea water can enter from both sides. Further erosion by the waves will ultimately lead to the total collapse of the arch, where the pillar of rock known as stack is left behind. The stack, when further eroded, becomes a stump, which is visible only above the sea level. Beaches. A beach is a depositional feature formed by the depositional action of waves in the coastal region. It usually consists of loose sand particles. Deposition occurs when the supply of sediments is more than the removal. Spits and bars. Spits and bars are the depositional features formed by the waves. The waves does the process of erosion continuously and deposits the sediments along the shore where there is some sort of indentation. As more debris is piled up into a ridge or embankment to form a tongue-like feature called spit, one end of the spit is attached to the land and the other end projecting into the sea. As deposition increases and a ridge of sand are formed across the mouth of a river or on the entrances of a bay, it is called a bar. In this topic you have learnt, waves are the most important and powerful agents of gradation near the coastal region. Waves erode, transport and deposit at the coastal areas. Cave, arc, stack and stump are the features that are formed at coastal areas which are close to mountainous regions. A beach is a depositional feature formed by the depositional action of waves in the coastal region. At the end of the topic, you will be able to understand the formation of landforms associated with glaciers, discuss the transformation of V-shaped valley to U-shaped valley, list the different types of moraines. Glaciers are large moving ice sheets. Glaciers cover the entire space where the temperature is below freezing point. Glaciers are found in all the continents except Australia. The point above the snow line is covered with snow in the mountainous regions. There are three types of glaciers. They are valley glaciers, continent glaciers, and Piedmont glaciers. Glaciers create a very large variety of landforms by erosion and deposition. Valley glaciers. The glaciers found on the top of the mountains are termed as valley glaciers. They are commonly found in Himalayas in Asia, Alps in Europe, Rockies in North America, and the Andes in South America. They are also called alpine glaciers. Continental glaciers and Piedmont glaciers. Continental glaciers. The north and south polar regions are vastly covered with ice. This extensive cover of ice over a large area is termed as continental glaciers. Piedmont glaciers. Ice accumulated along the foothills is known as Piedmont glaciers. When the steep valley glacier flow on to relatively flat land and forms a fan or a bulb-shaped Piedmont glacier. Cirque. Cirques are the features which are formed at the mountain slope due to the process of erosion. The bowl-shaped depression formed by the plucking of the rocks by glacier is known as cirque. Snow and ice accumulation leads to avalanching from the highest slopes of the mountain, which leads to the formation of cirques. Aretes and pyramidal peaks. Aretes are formed when two glacier cirques erode toward each other. It is a sharp knife-like ridge of rocks. They are also formed when glaciers erode parallel U-shaped valleys. When two or more cirques meet, a pyramidal peak is formed. U-shaped valley. U-shaped valleys are formed when the glacier travels across and down the valley, carving the slopes by eroding it. A V-shaped valley is deepened due to erosion. The side of the mountain widens and gives the shape of U, called U-shaped valleys. Hanging valley. Hanging valleys are formed by the tributary valleys. The main valley is eroded faster than its tributaries. As the main valley deepens, the tributary joining its looks hanging valley above the main valley. Moraines. Moraines are composed of debris ranging in size from as small as slit as big as large boulders. Moraines are made up of pieces of rock debris, boulders, and clay at the glacial valleys. Moraines are further divided into terminal moraines, lateral moraines, and medial moraines. Drumlins. Drumlins are depositional features formed by the deposition of clay and debris and resembles like half-buried egg. They look like an elongated hill in the shape of an inverted spoon. They are most commonly found in European regions. In this topic, you have learnt glaciers are moving ice sheets. Glaciers are found in all the continents except Australia. Valley glaciers are commonly found in the Himalayas in Asia, Alps in Europe, Rockies in North America, and the Andes in South America. Ice accumulated along the foothills is known as Piedmont glaciers. The bowl-shaped depression formed by the plucking of rocks by glacier is known as cirque. Arete is a sharp knife-like ridge of rocks. U-shaped valleys are formed when the glaciers travel across and down the valley, carving the slopes by eroding it. Moraines are composed of debris ranging in size from as small as slit or as big as large boulders. Drumlins are depositional features formed by the deposition of clay and debris and resembles like a half-buried egg. At the end of the topic, you will be able to understand the role of wind in the formation of landforms, identify the features formed due to wind erosion and deposition. Wind is also important in shaping the Earth's surface. Wind is capable of transporting the loose materials like sand and dust. Wind is a predominant agent of denudation in semi-arid and arid regions, as the rainfall in these regions are very low and soil found are loose to be easily carried by the wind. Wind becomes an important agent of gradation in desert regions due to the availability of plenty of loose soil. Many interesting features are formed here by wind action. Wind carves different landforms throughout the process of deflation and abrasion. The landforms found on the deserts are mushroom rock or pedestal rock, Inselbergs. Let's learn about them. Mushroom rocks are usually found in the desert regions. They are formed because of the wind erosion of an isolated rock. Eroding mostly at the bottom part of the rocks as soft rock found at the bottom, they are eroded faster than the hard rocks at the top. This continuous process of erosion carves the rock to resemble like a mushroom. They are also called pedestal rock. Inselbergs are isolated residual hills rising abruptly from the level ground. These isolated hills have steep slopes and rounded tops. Some features are formed by depositional process of wind in the desert regions. One such feature is Barken. Barken is a crescent moon-shaped dunes or an arc-shaped sand deposits. These features possess two horns that face the windward side of the dune and steep slope on the other side of the dune facing away the wind. Barken dunes are also known as transverse dunes. The Barkens occurs as group of isolated dunes and migrates ranging from a meter to 100 meter per year. As these dunes migrate, smaller dunes replace them. Saif or longitudinal dunes. They are elongated narrow dunes lying parallel to the prevailing wind direction. Longitudinal dunes are formed in area where sand is abundant and the wind is constant and strong. They are usually 10 meters high and 100 meters long. Loess, a deposition of fine silt or materials which are yellowish in color carried by the wind. The fine dust particles are blown away beyond the desert limits and deposited on the neighboring lands as loess. They are very powdery and are usually rich in fertility. In this topic you have learnt, wind is a predominant agent of denudation in semi-arid and arid regions, as the rainfall in these regions are very low and soil found are loose to be easily carried by the wind. Mushroom rocks are usually found in the desert regions. Inselbergs are isolated residual hills rising abruptly from the level ground. Barken is a crescent moon-shaped dunes or an arc-shaped sand deposits. Saifs are elongated narrow dunes lying parallel to the prevailing wind direction. Loess, a deposition of fine silt or silt materials which are yellowish in color carried by the wind.